Welcome to the Retirement Success in Maine podcast. My name is Ben Smith. I'm joined by my co-host, Abby Duty, the lobster to my scallops. How are you doing today, Abby?
Hey, Ben. Good. How are you?
I'm great. We have been kind of attacking a lot of themes on this show. And one that just kind of popped up to us, so as we've been thinking about our own client base, has been this concept of we have a nice group of clients that they're aging together and they're looking forward to retirement or in retirement, but they don't have kids, right? And they don't have kids, and I think there's a lot of people that are overlook the importance of those next generations that maybe can flip the script of we were parenting them, eventually that they help take care of us. And so we started looking out for that theme and saying, all right, well, we need to find somebody that's an expert here. So first, of course, we look in the state of Maine. We're, I think, the oldest state in the nation. So big issue there. Can't find anybody. We start looking nationally, and we did a blind request out to this guest today, and I was so excited that she got back to us. And I want to just give her a little intro here. So she is a nationally known expert in the field of planning for the next phase of life. She really recognized early on about the baby boomer generation and how they need to reinvent retirement in a really exciting way. And that led her to finding her business. So she's been featured and quoted in major media, which includes USA Today, Best Places to Retire, Forbes. She has an ongoing recurring article series in Forbes. You can read her there. Huffington Post, Senior Care Authority, and Longevity Network. She's been focused really since 2011 on Solo Agers. Is this theme that we're talking about, is aging without kids and those who are aging alone, maybe for other reasons. So she has a book that after reaching out to her, we've been reading, and I'll put this on video here, is Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers. And her name is Dr. Sara Zeff Geber. So with that intro, I want to welcome Sara to the show today. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Ben. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, Sara, in terms of our show, how we like to structure it is we always like to get to know you a little bit, right? We all, it's, to just kind of have you come on and talk about your expertise is great, but knowing why are you passionate about it? Why is this something that meant to be in terms of your life purpose? So maybe we could just start with kind of your upbringing and where you grew up.
Sure. I grew up in California in the Bay Area. Actually, I grew up in Berkeley. Most people know Berkeley. We'll have an active group of us that can't seem to let go of each other on Facebook. Gotcha. Yeah, it was an experience growing up in Berkeley. So we like to kind of hang on to a little of that. But now I live in Santa Rosa, California, which is, for those of you who aren't familiar really with the geography of California, it's about an hour and a half, hour and a quarter north of San Francisco.
Okay.
That doesn't mean you can drive it an hour, because we have a lot of people going back and forth. Well, at least we used to before COVID.
Right.
But it's in the wine country. So most everybody I think has heard of Napa Valley and Sonoma Valley wine country in California, and I live in the Sonoma Valley.
Okay.
Excellent.
So
that sounds like an exciting place to be, just in terms of activity, right? There's no shortage of things to do, places to see. Obviously, You have new people coming in, I'm sure, all the time, which keeps its vibrancy. Can you talk a little bit about your path towards becoming, obviously we just talked about your book a little bit, but you speak a lot, and I've seen your YouTube videos. You do workshops. Can you talk about that path towards kind of that role today?
Well, two things led me to get into this field. I used to be a management consultant. I used to be in leadership development and team building and that kind of thing. I did that for 25 years. Loved it. Mm-hmm. But there came a time, I don't know, probably when my clients and I were both approaching 60, that they started wanting to talk more about their retirement plans than their strategic plans. And I kind of was feeling a little antsy to figure out what the next phase of my life was going to look like too. So I kind of took that cue and took some additional training in the retirement transition in order to be a retirement coach. So I did that was about 10 years ago. I did that for a few years. And then I began to notice something else, just really kind of tangential to my coaching. I noticed that a lot of my friends and colleagues were spending a tremendous amount of time taking care of their aging parents. Mm-hmm. In some cases, they were flying across the country. In other cases, they were spending a tremendous amount of time getting mom settled in an assisted living community or making sure she had home help. It was a lot going on in that realm. Mm-hmm. And my husband and I don't have living parents. We both lost our parents kind of early in life. So we just never thought about that. But it wasn't lost on me that it was going on all around me. And one day I was having lunch with a friend of mine who's also a solo ager, and I said to her, you spent a lot of time talking to your mom, kind of shoring her up and encouraging her along her path, which was to move into a continuing care community. I said, who's going to do that for us? And we kind of looked at each other and went, oops.
Right.
It doesn't look like we have anyone coming along the pipeline because we're solo agers. So at that point, I realized that we needed a name, and that's when I coined the term Solo Ager. And that was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And ever since then, I really have seen that as my passion. It became my passion. I started talking about it. People would come up to me and say, you're really onto something. This is an issue. And they also convinced me that it isn't just people who don't have children that are solo agers.
Right.
That there are people who have children who are estranged or who live 9,000 miles away in some other country. That there are a lot of people out there who really strongly believe that they are or are going to be solo agers as they get up through those decades.
And I'd say that's kind of tangential to how we found you, right? Is this, you're looking for a theme and you're trying to find it. You say, hey, this is something where I just don't see anybody talking about this, right? I don't see anybody that's really even brought this to light. I think maybe just in terms of our country, anyway, we do a really poor job, I think, even having these conversations about going forward. I think it's just very romantic to talk about career and to talk about fame and success and all the things that accomplish with money and all of that. But it's really not romantic to talk about, and I know in your book, you talk about multiple stages of retirement.
Yes.
And I think we romanticize that first stage of retirement, but maybe not that second and third.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the theme that you're hitting on, is not only that you're not talking about it maybe just as a group in general, but here's just a very specific group as well, which when I'm reading your book and reading that, I think you had 2010 census data, and really the minority, and even women, the minority of women were living with a spouse. Right. And you're saying, that's a big theme. That's not just hey, this is 4% of the population that are doing this. This is big.
Yeah. When I recognized the need, I began to study what the statistics look like, at least from the 2010 census. And Pew Research, which is one of the most respected research groups in the country, did a study. They do a lot of family life studies. And one of the things they looked at is what was the childless rate among the different generations. And the baby boomers were really the most current one they could study at the time, because at that point, the youngest baby boomers were reaching about 43, 44 years of age. And that's just about the end of childbearing years. And guess what they found? 19.4% had never had children.
Yep.
Women.
Yep.
We can't, who knows how many men didn't have children.
Sure, yes.
Because we can't really track that as easily. But,
right.
But clearly there are plenty of men out there who are solo agers as well. It's just the women we can count.
And again, it's like you're seeing, and you kind of go through more reasons in the book about, there's maybe more career opportunities now for women than there ever have been, right?
Yeah.
There's more, hey, I have more independence and freedom, and it's more acceptable to kind of go and forge your own path. So I think there's more empowerment happening, and maybe we're not all the way to where we need to be with that, but it's just more and more kind of acceptance there. So I like that now you're saying, hey, we now have really all the data we need around baby boomers and kind of getting the solo aging statistics out there. But I want to ask you also about, Sarah, about Life Encore, because you kind of, I know you kind of touched on a theme, and now in terms of your work, can you talk about Life Encore? What do they do? How do you help pre-retirees and retirees navigate the perfect retirement? Because we're kind of saying the same thing, retirement success, right? Is what's that perfect retirement there?
Well, Life Encore is me. That is the company, that's the entity that I started through which to do my coaching. And I'm honestly not doing much one-on-one coaching anymore at all. I'm reaching out to the larger audience like this. During normal times, I do a lot of public speaking. I speak to a lot of professional groups. I speak to a lot of estate attorneys and financial planners because they have tons of clients who are solo agers, and they really need to know what special needs those solo agers have. So I like to reach out to those folks too. So Life Encore is really just another way of saying Sara Zeff Geber.
Okay. Well, and what you said is right, Sarah, is that, for us, this has been even, I think we know of the topic, right? Is to go, yeah, I have clients that don't have kids, and, and we're seeing, or they're, again, whatever the relationship, they're maybe estranged, or they're just whatever. And we know of it, but we need to be better, right? This is our job. They're looking to us to say, what don't I know about, not only just financially, what don't I know, but in terms of retirement, right? We need to be better retirement experts. We need to be better about forecasting what's coming down the road. And have you thought about A, B, and C? So for us, maybe just a little bit of a private interest for us is, hey, we just need to be doing better. And if people can listen in as we're doing the show, so it's really great there. I want to really go now in depth in terms of our topic here. And again, the name of the show we're talking about is Strategizing Retirement as a Solo Ager, right? Because again, I think strategizing retirement is one thing, but to take the lens of, hey, you're in this situation, and what does it mean maybe differently for you? That's where we want to go for all this kind of following questions. So I know we've kind of introduced the topic. Can you just give us the most formal definition you can as we're kind of coming up with solo agers? Because I know you mentioned about no kids, but can you talk about what that means? And then more prevalently, how the trend is. I know I gave some of the census data, but maybe even men to women, or kind of what you're seeing in different stages. Love to get that just first foundationally defined.
Sure. Well, my definition of a solo ager is, for starters, anyone without adult children. And then over the few years after I launched that whole idea, I got so much feedback that there were people out there that felt that they were definitely solo agers that did have kids, but maybe those kids lived far away, were estranged, weren't fully functional for some reason. So I pretty quickly expanded the definition. So now I say a solo ager is anyone who either doesn't have children or is aging alone for other reasons. And so it's really up to the individual, him or herself, to define whether they believe that they are a solo ager.
Can I ask because I just kind of see, as what you're seeing for caregiving is, hey, for adult children taking care of their parents as they're aging, right? And and I've just personally, I've had a conversation with my parents about this, because they took care of my, it was 93-year-old grandfather all the way until he's 99. Moved in with them. So for I think for the first 10 years, he was like 83 to 93, checking in on him, help grocery shop, do all those things together, and then taking much more of an active, really encompassing role as my parents had retired and taken care of him. But I hear the echo of that I don't want to do that to you, Ben. Right? Is they're kind of saying, hey, this is something that I had to do, and I don't want to do this now to you. But you kind of have that. Well, okay. Now we need to have conversations and structures and things about how that would take care of itself if you could. But there's a value system, I think, that might be changing as well. So I'd love to hear what you think about that in terms of, is this going to keep going? Does it have to keep going?
I don't know. I think you're asking several questions here.
Yes.
What you're describing with your grandparents is a very typical kind of scenario. Throughout the 80s, you keep an eye on them. Once they get into the 90s, they usually have to give up their driver's license. Often vision starts to diminish, hearing. So you've got some real issues to work with. And like many families that have the room and the time to devote, they moved your grandfather in with them. Perfect. And lots of families are still doing that for lots of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One is it's obviously the more economical way to go. We have many cultures in America, many of whom put family as the very highest value. And they would have an elder family member who couldn't take care of him or herself move in with them in a heartbeat. But you know as well as I do that that's not particularly the case with middle-class America today.
Right.
And a lot of people have small homes. They had children, maybe they had children late. Typical age to have children now is, early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time mom and dad need help, you may still be raising those kids. Or mom and dad may live thousands of miles away and have no desire to uproot themselves. And you probably certainly have no desire to uproot yourself. So we're looking at all kinds of different scenarios. And yes, I have heard countless people say to me, well, I have kids, but I don't want to be a burden to those kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
and
that's the key word.
To them. If that is what spurs them to do the planning that they need to do anyway, fabulous. And what I'm saying too is that solo agers absolutely need to do the planning because they don't have that safety net.
Right.
And that's really what I consider adult children to be, is more of a safety net than anything else. So don't want to use that safety net? Wonderful. Create a very sturdy, robust, and thorough plan for yourself, and you probably won't need to burden your kids with anything.
Right. Can you talk about maybe other myths that you're seeing with solo agers that are out there? Maybe it's not even just at the point that they would or would not be having kids, but maybe kind of going forward. Is there kind of outside judgment other than maybe the kid part about maybe that they're miscast or they're pitied? So what do you find in your research there?
I don't find much.
Okay.
The people in our society the women in our society that have chosen not to have children, unless they come from families where there was a lot of pressure put on them, and they didn't succumb to that pressure, and now they're, probably still under that kind of pressure, see what you missed and yada, yada, yada. There's so much opportunity to work with kids if you want to spend time with kids.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of solo agers do that. A lot of solo agers I know are teachers, or they volunteer in organizations where they're helping disadvantaged youth, or they're working as a mentor or a guide of some sort. So there's all kinds of opportunity to work with young people. And many solo agers do have a desire to do that, even though they chose not to have children themselves. And they're finding a lot of fulfillment that way. Very much different strokes for different folks.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of along those same lines, so we have some clients that are naturally solo agers, some that were widowed. What have you found to be the key to happiness in solo agers? And is it different for people when somebody becomes a solo ager, or if that happens naturally to them?
Well, I think the key for everyone to find satisfaction and fulfillment later in life is to have meaning and purpose to your life.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that comes from your work, as we know, a lot of people are working well into their 70s, some into their 80s. Satisfaction may come from that dimension. Satisfaction for a lot of people who do have children is being a grandparent. I call it being a professional grandparent because a lot of people in their 60s and 70s and probably on into their 80s find a tremendous amount of joy, and the parents find a tremendous amount of help in having them spend time with the grandkids. So those are two biggies. But of course, people who have left their jobs and who may not have grandparents or don't have grandparents living nearby have found fulfillment in just hundreds and hundreds of ways, through art or through volunteering or through sports. People get into all kinds of different things. The wonderful thing about the baby boom generation, not that we were so special, but we came along at a time when medical science was able to do a lot of things to keep us moving and in better health. So with knee replacements and hip replacements and all of that, we've certainly been able to move into our later decades that might have failed our ancestors. Now we're kind of bionic in a sense, or we can be bionic and continue and enjoy the things we love. But people are finding fulfillment in so many ways. And it just breaks my heart when I have someone come to me and say, you know, my husband retired a couple of years ago and all he does is sit in front of a TV. And I say, oh no. You know, that's a death trap. It really is.
Yeah, and we've kind of explored that a lot, Sarah, is this whole idea of, and I think we try to fight this tide a lot, is this retiring from something is not leading to success. It's retiring to something, right? So is visualization and what brings you happiness, what brings you joy, what's your purpose, what brings you value, investing in those things and then lining them up in the two part, you know, versus I'm just burnt out, I'm just going to quit, I'm just going to do nothing, just sit in front of you, which you know, sometimes that's the break after, is sometimes people just are burnt out, they need a break. But then flipping forward is kind of, and you made the point in your book several times about those that are continuing to look forward to things, are active and are seeing things to do all the time. They're just living longer because loneliness and depression doesn't set in, right? Because after a while, you were kind of showing that, hey, you know, that may be okay for a while you do that, but eventually you're just going to get, you might just get very lonely and depressed and lots of things happen. And that just shortens your longevity.
Yeah. And I will tell you, I have seen everything in between. I have seen people, I know people personally that find plenty of fulfillment on the golf course. You know, they go from one golf game to a dinner to a some kind of club activity and they're not really volunteering. They're into golf. It's their whole life. So different strokes for different folks.
That's right.
And one of the things I really caution people about especially when I talk to other retirement coaches, because I also belong to a group of retirement coaches, wonderful group. And I say, you know, be careful that you don't become judgmental about people, what people do in their retirement, because there are people out there who will be completely fulfilled in their life doing something that you and I would just roll our eyes and go, ugh, but It's not their thing to go
Yes.
work in a soup kitchen, or it's not their thing to be a dog walker or whatever.
And I think that's part of this too, is why we wanted to have you on and talk about this theme of solo aging, is that whole idea of maybe from 3 generations ago, this would have been a very kind of not acceptable lifestyle, right? Is to say, you know, you didn't follow a traditional family planning approach, and because of that, and here's where it goes. You know, again, as we've kind of talked about, is they were debunking that a lot. But I want to kind of go forward now here a little bit, because you have in your book, you had a really good story. And I know we talked a little bit offline about this. One I just kind of really sunk in, I read it 2 or 3 times, was this couple that was aging in their late 80s and early 90s. And they, you know, solo agers, and they had some neighbors that moved into town. They met through some social circles, and just really kind of clicked. And then they were checking in with each other, and you know, they would eat together, all that. Well, but then when one of them got sick and had to go to the hospital, you know, the other couple one of the other couples had to take care of the wife that was at home, and all of a sudden they saw dementia. They were seeing that she was getting up at 3 a.m. Trying to make breakfast, behavioral things going on. So that you know, you could kind of see, well, they had this really lucked out, I think, as you said in the book, that they kind of sprung into a support system to help them with that third phase of retirement and aging. So I want to kind of then zoom out here a little bit of what are some really big mistakes that you see solo agers make? Because I think you're pointing out one there about not having a structure in place, and they were gotten all the way to that third phase in the 90s without it there. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Ben, you're referring to two of my favorite people, Fred and Hildy, who actually, I never met Fred and Hildy, but I am very good friends with the people that kind of adopted them when they moved into their neighborhood, my friends Peter and Andrea. And the point that I make in the book, and the reason that story is front and center, is because Fred and Hildy didn't do any planning, but they got so lucky in the end to find Andrea and Peter, who just absolutely fell in love with them and kind of adopted them. They ended up being their powers of attorney for finances and for healthcare. They were at least lucid enough, early on enough to create estate documents and financial documents that named Peter and Andrea to do this, so they could take them to the hospital. They were the ones that the hospital would call with updates. They were the ones that knew what they wanted in terms of their healthcare decisions, and they saw them right up to the end. Andrea and Peter might not have been good people. They might have taken terrible advantage of them. So for the Fred and Hildys of the world, which millions of us will be if we don't plan ahead, for who is going to kind of adopt us, who is going to take over that decision making if the time comes that we cannot. Because somebody asked me the other day, well, what's your real mission in life here? And I said, it's to drag baby boomers' heads out of the sand and have them acknowledge the fact that they have other stages of development in front of them. And it's going to be different. They're not all going to just be, one of my friends puts it, I just want to be happy, 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 dead. But that's not the way it goes for many people. You may spend a few years of your life with a disability. You may need some help. You may need to have someone be there for you on a regular basis. We don't know for sure. On the other hand, you may have a heart attack when you're 78, and that'll be the end of it. So because we don't have a crystal ball, it seems prudent to me that everyone should do the planning necessary in case they do end up in a situation where they need help.
Right. And I know we'll talk about kind of social network in a bit, but I think that's an important part is again where, what might be kind of easier for those that are not solo agers, like, well, I just name the kids and they can, even if they're not there, I could just kind of have them be in that place, and at least there's kind of this blood is thicker than something else analogy you can kind of go to, is like, that's an easy thing. That's a really tough decision point, especially is testing your social network that you've created. So I think that was a really good, important kind of takeaway action step for somebody is thinking about that there.
So you touched on it in your story that you were just talking about, and we've talked about it in a couple of episodes in our podcast, the importance of wills, trusts, power of attorneys, right, in the financial planning process. And a big piece of this is leaving a legacy. So how can solo agers leave a legacy?
I think it depends on how you define legacy.
Mm-hmm.
To me, a legacy is very much not about money.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what you leave behind in the way of your good deeds, in the way of your spirit, in what you've taught people. I have a couple of nieces that I know I will leave a legacy of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Their parents did not go to college, but I managed to convince at least one out of the two to go to college, and I helped her with that, and she is now a graduate with a fine arts degree. And has turned into a very solid citizen. So I know that I have left a legacy with her. I know that I've left a legacy with many of the people that over the years I have had an influence on and taught in some ways. So that will surely be my legacy, for
Mm-hmm.
instance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everyone leaves a legacy of some sort. And yeah, it's kind of interesting to muse about what that legacy might be, and people with money try and put things in place like foundations and leave concrete brick and mortar legacy behind them, and that's all well and good. But most of the rest of us don't have that kind of money, and our legacy will be in our spirit and the things that we've left in the world.
Yeah, and I'll share with you too, Sarah, is that I think that legacy is something that comes out in our conversations with folks, and one thing that I've talked about with one client, and it's not a solo aging example, but we're talking about, well, what's one thing that you want to do maybe with your grandkids or somebody that's really important with you. And this gentleman said, what was really important to me, I said to my grandchild at 5 years old that I want to help him buy a car. And we talked, and he said, and he goes, it's 3 years later now, he's 8. And he goes, Grampy, 8 more years and you're helping me buy that car. So we said, well, just fast forward to that day 8 more years from now, right? Think about that day, you going with that person, in this case, your grandchild, helping them buy their first car. There's a financial lesson in there, what's prudent in terms of budgeting, what's appropriate for a 16-year-old to drive, what's the gas mileage, and what's important about gas mileage and why you should consider, like, all of those life experiences. And probably for the rest of that grandchild's life, they're going to think about that day that person, grandfather in this case, helped me buy this car. In every car from now on, they're going to think about you.
Yeah, and
right?
they'll probably pass that legacy along and be the grandfather eventually that buys their grandchild a car.
Yeah, and I know that's a financial related thing, but I think there's a point of, sometimes how we do one thing is how we do everything, right? And it's well, here's one example that I took from one person, and it might be even that I obviously in this world we're not doing it, but if we're shaking hands and you ask really how are you doing, and you spend time with people to really care. People get that, and they go, if you took the moment to just care about me, what else do you really care about? And that's a type of impact, is you made the point about being indirect and direct impacts with legacy. So I think that was a really kind of neat point that you were bringing to the surface of that. It's not this traditional of, I got to give so much money to this thing, and if I don't have money, then I don't have any legacy. That is not at all true.
Absolutely.
nor even kind of appropriate. So I want to maybe talk a lot about then some maybe shift from legacy, and we talked a little bit about social networks, and you have a really great flow chart in your book about the social network of maybe traditional kind of that parent to kid side, where who's in our life, what relationships do we have, and how big the kind of child and grand children part of that flow chart is for parents, right, and grandparents. They spend a lot of their time in those relationships. But think of the solo agers, that they really start investing in tons of other relationships. They have all that time to really, so their social network can be really robust and really big. And I did not even thought of that as a point. Like what a great insight of, here's something where you can really work to develop your social network. And I've seen your speech too a couple of times where you talk about, you really want 8 to 10 as kind of the number of relationships that are really important in your life, and because things will change and all that. But can you talk about some ways that solo agers can really bolster that network, especially after they retire from their midlife career?
Sure, and it is so important. People with big families have kind of built-in strong social networks, especially if those families are co-located at least within 100 miles of one another.
Yep.
Solo agers very typically don't have that kind of robust, big family network. So we have to work to develop our social connections. And there are so many ways to do that. Typically, solo agers develop very strong ties with people they work with. Now, those ties may or may not survive retirement or leaving that field and moving on to your next act, whatever it is. But if you're a natural at building relationships, you'll build them wherever you go.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not a natural at it, there are some things that you can do to avoid many hours sitting solo in front of a TV, which is what we all want to avoid, kids or no kids. And that is, begin to look at your own interests and join some groups that share those interests. It can be as simple as a book club. It can be a hiking club. It can be a quilting club. It can be art classes. It can be, some of you are probably familiar with OLLI, the Lifelong Learning Institute. And most universities and most areas of the country carry those courses. I know people that have developed strong communities of people that go from one of these courses to the next, and they connect with each other outside of the classroom. And now, of course, everything is on Zoom. So I even know people who have met others through Zoom meetings. There's a group, a fairly new organization called Vitality Society. And it emanates from New York City, but it's a nationwide phenomenon of resources and activities for older adults. So the founder of Vitality Society, Meredith Oppenheim, asked me not too long ago to facilitate their solo aging discussions, because they have a big solo ager group. And over the months as I've been doing that, I've seen a couple people recognize that, oh, they live near each other. Why don't we meet for a socially distanced, masked rendezvous in person? We'll take a walk in Central Park, or we'll do something in our neighborhood. So people are even meeting online. And of course, if you don't know about meetup.com, it's a great way for people to find others with their same interests and get involved in doing things. You have to put yourself out there. It's not just going to happen to you if you haven't been a natural bridge builder. Now, having said that, some people carry with them throughout their lives their associations through their church or synagogue or mosque or wherever you worship. Those can be very, very powerful and long-lived affiliations that can grow into very rich friendships. And also, most religious organizations have all kinds of opportunities to volunteer and give back to society. So even if you have left behind your religious affiliation of your youth, you may want to re-explore what's happening in that church or synagogue today, because religious organizations today, from what I've seen, are pretty different organizations than they were back in the 60s and 50s. So I know a lot of people belong to them almost purely for social reasons, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I think in Maine that's kind of the problem here. If you're looking at an issue, is when you get kind of north of Portland, which again, Portland's in the southern part of the state, and I think that's where a lot of population density is, more increased social engagement and more activities. You start getting more north, and it's there probably is almost every half mile to a mile there's the neighbor, right? And then you have long winters, so it's really tough to engage socially, right? It's that is in that, I think that's a big issue in our region is this whole, I'm going to get isolated, I'm going to get lonely, I'm going to get depressed, and if I let just kind of gravity and nature take its course, I'm going to get more and more enclosed in. And what you're saying is exactly right. You have to put out effort. And you had a quote there of, to have a friend, you need to be a friend. And what a poignant statement of that, of you need to put yourself out there, and you need to also put effort into investing in these relationships of, grab a coffee with somebody, right? Go in our area, go to the local Dunkin' Donuts or Tim Hortons, and you see that every day. You walk in and there's a bunch of people just having some coffee. Yeah. I know we're not in this world. When we get back to normal, that will be back to it, or McDonald's, but that's where those little, whether it be McDonald's or whatever, those are the centers here.
Yeah.
And they're finding those connections, but you gotta but that's what we have. I think you're right on with churches. Churches is kind of the strong network here, and Abby will ask the next question around that. But then area agencies on aging is the next thing, that it just binds everybody around these social circles and caregiving conversations, and having kind of round tables around caregiving, and all of those things together are really important. So I want to just highlight that. It's just from a local flavor of that, of just making that more local is important. So I'll turn it over to Abby for the next one there.
I know, and you teed me up perfectly.
I did.
So spirituality often becomes more important to people as they age, right? And you even touched on this, Sarah. And so we talked about that in one of our prior episodes as well. So is that important to solo agers? And what suggestions do you have for people who are looking to get back into a group, or looking to get more into spirituality as they age?
Sure. I think that there's no difference between solo agers and people who do have kids when it comes to religion and spirituality. There are all kinds of options to get involved in a church or a synagogue, or a place that is let's see, and here in my area, we have something called the Center for Spiritual Living. I'm not sure how widespread they are across the rest of the country, but for those people who are not interested in talking about God or Jesus or something of the spiritual connection of their youth, that's a wonderful home for them. And they operate just like a church in that they have worship services where they mostly meditate and do other kinds of spiritual activities to connect people with their spiritual center, without the dogma that went with the churches that people are sometimes now saying, no more. So there's that. There's yoga centers, there's meditation centers, all of those kinds of places are set up to help people become more in touch again with their spiritual center. But that can happen through a traditional church or synagogue or mosque as well. So whatever kind of calls to you, give it a try. Just walk in the door one day. I can almost guarantee you'll get a warm welcome, because if nothing else, those organizations always want to increase their membership.
Yes.
So,
and that's again with us, you have such kind of these very rural, very traditional places of worship, and the ones that really aren't kind of again in Maine, the ones that are not evolving with the times, and they're kind of getting a little more modern with kind of the population and their lifestyles and tastes. You're seeing the membership decline. The ones that are evolving are kind of growing here more. So you're seeing again, and that's where we were encouraging in that 5th episode was, hey, if you find one that's really, even though it's local to you, but maybe it doesn't fit, just try it out. If it doesn't fit, there's other ones that you can just try and go to other areas. And again, really great networks there that are there to get you there, right? And they want to bring you in. So it touches not just the spirituality, touches social, touches kind of this human connection side, which again is kind of a very necessary piece.
And some churches and places of worship have, especially the larger ones, have all kinds of activities that are available within the membership too. Sports teams, everything from sports teams to full gymnasiums.
Yes,
I think
movie theaters.
Even see more of that where you are, where people are really kind of shut in the winter and can't do a lot of physical activity outside.
Yep.
You probably have more of that kind of opportunity going on.
That's right. And they have to, right? They have to keep doing it because there's just limited options. I want to ask another question, Sara, about Solo Agers, because you kind of have a theme here about aging in place is one thing that is a general theme we hear a lot, which I'm sure most of this generation says, I want to stay in my home as long as possible. And I want to fight that stage to go into some sort of, whether it be retirement community, assisted living, nursing, whatever the life stage of retirement community is there. But there's this kind of idea about deciding how and where. And I want to throw an example at you. We have one client and they're pre-retirement, right? And they're solo agers. And they're saying, you know what? Hey, I don't have any binds here. You know what would be really great is to go move to Bolivia. Move to Bolivia. I bet cost of living's cheaper. I bet we could do it for a long period of time. We could, there's so many, it's going to be better weather and get out of this political culture in the United States, all of that, whatever the reasons are, and moving away. How would you counsel, not just maybe this particular example, but how would you, because again, it's a very different situation of my kids are right in town, so I can't ever move, right? So you kind of have a little bit of those ties that aren't there is actually a really good thing in some cases. And you now have maybe more independence and freedom of where you want to go. Can you just talk about those decision points?
Yes, absolutely. There's so much to talk about here.
Yes, I know.
Unfortunately, the bad news on that, or actually just the bad reality, it's not news, is that some people think that there is nothing between that skilled nursing facility that just lost 20 people to COVID and staying in my own home.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
There is so much along that spectrum of senior residents and choices in senior housing. There's just so much. A lot of it will depend on your pocketbook. The kind of at the upper end of things are these communities called continuing care communities, continuing care retirement communities, CCRCs, also called life plan communities. And they are communities that you buy into when you can live totally independently, and you continue to live totally independently in that community. You buy an apartment or more like a condominium, and as you need more help and care, it's available to you. Now, there's all kinds of financial models around that, which I'm not going to take the time to go into, but that's kind of the ultimate for people that do have a substantial retirement purse behind them and have a home to sell, most likely a home to sell that's worth, more than just a couple $100,000. So that's one, but there are also, there's a new phenomenon just kind of coming online called active adult. And it's appropriate for a lot of different size purses. The active adult is kind of like your 55 plus community, except that when you move in, you rent your apartment, you choose an apartment and rent it. It is for people who are 55 plus, but they also have other elements to it. There's also an activity element, and they have the property has a lot of different opportunities for people to be active physically and congregate with others. So it's some people call it independent living light. Because the big difference between independent living as it's defined by the senior housing industry is that it also includes a meal plan.
Mm-hmm.
So active adult doesn't include that kind of a meal plan, although some of the communities that are being built today actually are building a commercial kitchen and they're using it for other things, but they know that at some point the residents might ask to put that into play as a kitchen to prepare meals for them. So
Sure.
It's kind of a complicated array out there, but also there are opportunities to move in with other people. There's a huge home sharing movement going on in the country right now. There are also co-housing communities that are becoming much more popular. It's a concept that started in Europe and now it's sweeping the US. There's about 300 different co-housing communities around the country. The point really is that we all need to live in some kind of community. And if you are lucky enough to live in a community right now that's stable and that where people care about you and you're going to be there with them for the duration of your life and they're close enough to holler to when you step out your front door, great. And if your house is set up well for aging, great. But most people cannot answer yes to those things.
Right.
That suburban home in a cul-de-sac, that two-story home in a cul-de-sac where you drive into your garage and never see your neighbor is not conducive to healthy aging. It doesn't put you in a community. So I encourage everybody to really, really reconsider where they're living, especially if they've led a rural life. Because unless you have very special circumstances around you, getting older in a rural setting can be a recipe for loneliness and isolation.
And I guess I kind of go with that too, is I think we're seeing that a lot is like in, again, Northern Maine, just no structure there, right? Is you have aging housing population that has not been maintained. It's not meant to live in, multiple floors, bathroom on the second floor. You have the laundry in the basement, and it's just, and they don't have the money to maintain these houses. So, but they have no other option, right? I went to an AARP listening session with the state of Maine and how DHHS would kind of spend kind of the money towards supporting seniors. And that was a lot of the conversation was we need those sorts of structures that you just discussed, right? Is we need some sort of senior living community that allows us to not just kind of on the maybe 55 and older, maybe there's other parts of the community that needs to be there too to help support this community, right? Is that we can have all life stages to help support and we all help each other. And they're seeing all these models and they're saying, well, why aren't we doing anything like this? And it's just, again, you continue to cut, state budgets as it is, there's less money on this and those things being talked about, but yeah, there's limited options. So then you go, if I don't have options in my even local area, or even moving to population centers within the state, that because they don't have that either, then I do have to leave. Right? Is I have to go examine other options and the hard part about that is they're then structured with, well, I just spent all this time developing a social network right here.
Yep.
And I have to then move and then replenish.
And that's when I urge people to start this thinking early. Start this when you're still fully mentally and physically capable of making a move and making new friends. Do it in your 60s. Do it in your early 70s. Realize that if you realize your lifestyle is not sustainable for you in your 80s and 90s, make the move early. And most solo agers, not all, but most solo agers do have family somewhere. It may be nieces and nephews, younger siblings that have established a life in a community, maybe a few states away. Consider that. Begin to look around at what's available in those areas, and then you'll be able to also name some of those family members as your to have your advance directive, to have your power of attorney, but you need to begin to deepen your relationship with them first.
Yeah.
And in most cases, they'll certainly welcome you. I'm not saying to live with them, but to look around at different kinds of senior housing communities that might be in that area. Probably in Maine, mobile home parks are not real popular. You don't have the weather that's very conducive to that.
Correct.
In warmer climates, I've become a huge fan of mobile home parks because they're affordable for most people. They're one level, they're small, they're self-contained, and people have to get out and mingle with others. Generally speaking, people may have a carport, but extra cars are always kept on the periphery. There's a clubhouse, there's often a swimming pool. The residents themselves organize all kinds of activities. They do potlucks and movie nights, and the folks that I have met from these communities have really done a good job building a community. They don't need to think further than that. They're already there. If they have to bring in some care eventually, that'll happen. But often people in those parks really take pretty good care of each other. If someone can't drive for a couple of weeks because they've had a knee replacement or they need their dog to be walked, it happens. And people just watch out for one another. It's a wonderful thing. And it's exactly the kind of community feeling that I think we all should be looking for.
Absolutely. So we're going to totally shift gears on you. And for our last question of the podcast, so the title of the podcast, right, is The Retirement Success in Maine. So we ask every guest, what is your personal definition of retirement success?
Having people around me that I love and that love me and that I'm devoted to and they're devoted to me. And whether that includes my spouse at that point, I don't know. We're both solo agers, so we have to plan to be solo agers. We don't know who's going to predecease the other. But to me, retirement success is living in a secure environment that I enjoy and having people around me that I love.
That's great.
A really good answer. Yeah, we love that. So Dr. Geber, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It's been our pleasure. Again, we've gotten a lot of just immense, really just as a resource, just a lot of really, just appreciate your expertise.
Thank you.
To come on the show. And again, I'm not all the way done, and I'll confess that right now of your book. I've taken even longer, I think, than I thought I was going to be rereading some of these sections, but I can just see where we can be handing these out to our clients and saying, you got to read this, because it is, and I know it says it's the roadmap. It really is the roadmap. It's like really great decision points, really good things for then us to bring up to our clients, because these are decision points.
I know a lot of financial advisors that do exactly that. Mm-hmm. They know they have a lot of solo aging clients and they just give them a book. It's part of their work with them.
Yeah. And it just tees up those conversations, right? Is because if you're saying, hey, all of a sudden I want to be living somewhere else, well, we need to know that, because all of a sudden that plan that we had in place about what your spending rate was, we need to adapt and we need to adjust. So the more we look down the road for us and see those guideposts, the more we're going to do it. We're going to do a better job. And I think that's where, again, personally, and our team here, we've gotten a lot of utility and value from your writing and your expertise. So we can't thank you enough for coming on. This has been great.
Thank you.
So Solo Aging with Dr. Sara Geber. It really kind of again, I'd never heard of it. I'd never really as a theme, right? As obviously know people that were experiencing kind of how they're experiencing life that way, but as a theme and all the issues that go with it. And again, kind of reading the book, I know like we've done, is to say, oh man, there's a lot more to this than I ever could have thought. So again, good to have her on and really go in depth in terms of these topics with us. Abby, could you maybe just share a lesson that you'd like to highlight for the audience here? Because I know there's a ton what you could do, but what's the one thing that you would kind of take away for today?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I found so interesting, and I had never really thought about it in the way that she phrased it, but when you don't have kids, you don't have that safety net there. So, if people don't do a good job planning for retirement, the kids are always a backup, right? They'll take care of me. Maybe I can live with them if I need to. But if you don't have that there, then you really need to be more prepared, have a better plan in place. Otherwise, you might get in a situation where either it doesn't go well or you need to rely on luck or randomness to help succeed. So I think that's really important for people, is the importance of having a well thought out and very prepared retirement plan.
Yeah, and it's more of it just situationally aware, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
hey, when this happens, what do I do, and where do I go, and who can I talk to about it? And again, I know like we had Diane Walsh from Eastern Area Agency on Aging on our second episode, and you know those sorts of resources. So she did a really great job actually going through all of her episodes as a little bit of a
Mm-hmm.
recap, but relating to solo aging was kind of a really good. Her track and our track are very similar, just with different audiences. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a pretty neat to see there. But you're absolutely right with safety nets, right? Is if you don't have the financial, because if you don't have the kids to take care of you as a safety net, then financial might be a good replacement for it. But what if I don't have enough financial? Then what do I do, and where do I go, and where do I go, and all of those things. So I kind of right dovetail into kind of my takeaway for today was the importance of the social network, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it, basically kids and grandkids are the social network for those that have kids, right? And they invest a lot of their time and effort there. But in one of the workshops I've listened to of Dr. Geber's, is she talks about the importance of having 8 to 10 um, friends and strong relationships, right? Because I would even say, hey, I know a bunch of people that have just one really good friend network, right? Is, hey, these are my best friends. We do things together. And those are maybe early retirement. That's what they do. And that they get along okay. And that's where they invest. But for solo agers, again, if you don't have the friend safety net, if you don't maybe have financial, is even having that you have a friend network of, hey, here's 3 or 4 friends that can take care of me. And she says 8 to 10, because what about if you have a friend that moves away? What
Mm-hmm.
if you have a friend that predeceases you? What if they get sick? And so if you have that circle together, you can all kind of help each other a little bit and take a little bit on. So that was one of her points, is that I used the quote of her book, was to have a friend, you got to be a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Put yourself out there a little bit. It's scary, I know, right? And there's going to be some friendships that fizzle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's got to be okay. But you gotta do that, because that is an important part. But you probably already have that in place, is her point.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in terms of your work, in terms of the time you spent with other people, as we've all gone through life, reconnect with those people. I think that was a really good important kind of takeaway for the solo aging thing. So again, we are on episode 23. So we are 23 episodes old at this point. So if you want more resources, you can go to blog.guidancepointllc.com/23, and you can see our webpage dedicated to this show. Again, we'll have links to if you want to check out Dr. Geber's book. Again, it's on video for those that are seeing us on video here. But again, you can even I know it's on Kindle as well. So for those that are on Kindle and don't want the Dead Tree book, you can absolutely do that. But yeah, we'll put more resources there for things that we reference, things that we were mentioning in that website, transcription of the show. Also reach out to us. Love to hear from you. If there's something that you want to talk about, would love to hear from you and your kind of feedback and where things are going. But hope you're enjoying our show, Retirement Success in Maine. We'll hope to see you next time. Take it easy.